There's a guy that I've been following for a while. His name's Dr. John Campbell. He has a YouTube channel, and he's a nurse, but like he's been in the game for a long time, but he's really deep into it. If you know what I mean, his CV basically is quite impressive for just a nurse type thing. He was like a senior nurse type thing, and he did a lot of research, and he did a lot of talks prior to the whole COVID thing. He was producing videos on YouTube about all sorts of illnesses and heart issues and all that kind of stuff. And because he's really interested in it, basically, it's his career basically.
Well, nurses are great because they actually practically have to deal with illnesses on the front lines.
He's actually a trainer.
Not theory.
Yeah, and he became a trainer then of nurses. So he taught nurses, right? So he's a teacher of nurses. But it's a good YouTube channel. If you want to check it out, Dr. John Campbell is the name of the YouTube channel. He's a funny guy because he's in no way a conspiracy theorist, right? Because he had the whole in the background of his videos, he has the whole hands, face, space, or the different posters to protect yourself. And most of his videos were all just looking at data, but he did a good job on looking at ivermectin. He looks objectively at a lot of these things, you know what I mean? And he's not pro government, but there's he looked at vitamin D, and he was pushing vitamin D a lot, telling people when governments were saying nothing about vitamin D, he at least was saying, look here, and he references studies all the time in his videos that actual legitimate studies that show the validity of what he's talking about. Because then quite often it was counter to what the government was saying, or at least was filling in a big gap in terms of something the government wasn't saying about how to protect people against these kind of viruses, right? So he just did one a few days ago and it's just in line with those other articles we just showed you. If you want to just throw it up there, Chu, it's Freedom of Information Revelation.
And there's a new Freedom of Information request release from the United Kingdom that shows the number of deaths actually solely attributable to COVID may be way lower than anyone had thought. And if this data applies to the UK, I'm sure it applies to the United States, Canada, European countries, all the other sort of what we might call advanced economy countries, it will also apply to, I would imagine. Now, it's interesting. Let's look at it. So here we have, this is the 30th of March 2020 to the 7th of January 2022. In other words, this is basically this is the time of the pandemic when people have been dying, up to the 7th of January. Office for National Statistics, obviously, it's a couple of weeks behind, but it's not bad. 127,704 excess deaths above the 5-year average. Now, this is from a Freedom of Information request. Deaths from COVID-19 with no other underlying cause. So here we have deaths for 2020. So the total deaths where COVID-19 was the only cause of death on the death certificate. Therefore, we can assume that the people didn't have comorbidities. So that's for 2020. The total deaths was 9,400. 0 to 64 was 1,549. Over 65s was 7,851. And actually, the average age, when we take all these together, for the whole figures of combined, the average age was about 81.5 years or thereabouts. Therefore, 2020 and the first 3 quarters of 2021, total deaths from COVID alone, 17,371. Of this, 13,597 was 65 or over. Of this 17,371 that we're talking about, 3,774 were under 65. And the average age of death from COVID over the whole time in the UK is actually a bit higher than I thought. Average age of death in the UK from COVID-19 in 2021, so this is 2021 data, 82.5 years of age. So the average person that died.
And arguably, yeah, the bottom line is far more than people who actually had their lives cut short, let's say, by COVID. There's only, like we saw, those figures, 9,000 in 1 year, 6,000 in another in the UK. That they are the people who you can. That's the numbers. 15,000 over the past 18 months, 2 years. You can only reasonably claim is the number of people who had their lives cut short by COVID.
Yeah.
Which again is tiny, because you're talking about 15,000, 16,000 out of, like I said, you're talking about in the UK over that period of time, let's call it 18 months. You're talking about 750, 800,000 people who die in that period anyway. A lot of them, vast majority of them, yeah, still older people with one foot in the grave, as I said, but also a lot of people who die untimely deaths from various different causes. And COVID is simply one more thing that contributed a very small number to that list of things that cause people to have untimely deaths or have their lives cut short. The thing is, this data is there and it's available and it's pretty much all in. Someone hopefully is maybe putting together a kind of a book, but I think it's going to be, or some kind of disclosure on the whole thing. But and it's still a bit too early. But I think maybe later this year, maybe next year, you'll get somewhere. It won't be shouted from the rooftops. It won't be publicized. It won't be, people won't be encouraged to read it or anything like that. But I'm sure it'll be available, that someone will provide a hard data analysis of it all, and the conclusion will be that the virus was really nothing for people to get so worked up about. It was only dangerous to the people that the flu is dangerous to, and that lockdowns killed a vastly more people than the virus ever did. But too late, it's done.
I Googled something else.
Don't be Googling, Neil.
I know.
Google's your...
What is the life expectancy, I asked, in the UK? Average life expectancy.
Yeah.
As of 2019, it is 81.2 years. What did he say was the average age of death?
1.5.
Higher than. So even the argument that COVID cut short those 15,000 lives is thin.
Well, it depends. Nobody's looked at who those, with the breakdown in age group. Well, did he say that? Yeah, okay, he did. Yeah, sure. So even the people that died strictly from COVID, even they were people who
have reached past the average age.
I think
of life
somewhere else in that video he says that because they were elderly and were at or past the average life expectancy. I think in women it cut short.
Maybe women was lower.
In women a little bit lower, but it cut short. It cut short their life years. The amount of time it took off their lives was about 7 weeks. For men, it was none. So, yeah. So it's crazy, yeah, because I would have thought that the strictly from COVID thing would have been maybe weighted a bit more towards younger people and stuff, but apparently not. Apparently it's still elderly, but again, elderly who are healthy,
yes,
and have had no expectation that they were going to kind of pop their clogs, let's say, and they did because of COVID alone. They had no comorbidities, but literally 95+% of the people who died from COVID did not die from COVID. They died with COVID. They had multiple other comorbidities. They had very short life expectancy. They were going to die very soon anyway. Therefore, COVID did not kill them, clearly. Yeah. But those are the numbers we've been given over and over again, and that have been used to justify lockdowns and the restriction of, people's, the destruction of people's civil liberties, and the ushering in of this kind of weird totalitarian effed up new normal. Yeah. So it's that's where we're at anyway. I mean, I'm just tired of saying it, to be honest. Like, I mean, we've said it so many times. We've said it so many times on so many different platforms, and so have many other people, but no one's listening. So no one cares. Well, not no one, but very few people care. So what do? It's still fun to talk about. Fun in a kind of dystopian, weird, creepy, not really very fun way. But anyway.
Well, it's still fun. It's interesting.
It's interesting. Let's see.
I mean. To dig down and find out. It's almost like I don't know, it's like searching for the God particle, in quantum physics. And you look down and down and you see more and more space, but where's the matter? Where's the substance of this thing? The closer you look, the more horrifying it becomes, because you're like, you really, really get to terms with the extent to which human psychology, expectations, programming, behavior, supports all of this. There isn't. I mean, God knows those people who went into SARS-CoV-2 doesn't exist, and there's no such thing as viruses. Had a kind of point in that when you look down at these things, you're like, it's ephemeral. What is it? What are we hanging all of this? All of these life-changing decisions on?
Yeah. But, you know, you don't have to say that something doesn't exist. If someone's masquerading as someone else, you unmask them. You don't say they don't exist.
Yes.
It's partly true to say that the person with the mask on, that mask is not a representation of a real person, and therefore that person doesn't exist. But there's a real person behind it. Just unmask them. Just point out what's actually going on. This person is pretending to be someone else. This information is
Yeah.
pretending to be some other information. It's not actually what they claim it is. You don't have to turn around and say it's all false and none of it
Yeah.
exists. You know what I mean? You're not gonna. It's not true, and therefore you're not going to really
Yeah.
get much of an audience. You're going to do damage to anybody who's trying to actually
Unmask.
unmask and
Yeah.
point out what's actually going on. But the problem is that data, all of it leads inexorably to a conclusion that the vast majority of people don't want to accept. It's inescapable, you know, and people don't want to hear it
Yeah.
because it's not that they don't like the data, they disagree with the data, they disagree, or rather don't like where the data is going, the conclusion that the data leads them to. They don't like that conclusion, therefore I don't like your data.
Yeah. No one likes to be taken for a fool. They don't want to be.
No, I'm talking here about the actual data that we would be presenting.
Yeah.
That people don't want to hear the kind of stuff that we've just laid out, or that your guy, Dr. whatever his name is,
Campbell.
was laying out. You know, I mean, he does it in a very kind of passive,
Yeah.
almost detached way, and he's wonder what's going on here, and he just moves on. But he doesn't draw any conclusions. But obviously, for anybody with two brain cells rubbing together, that the conclusion of a quick, fairly brief analysis of objective data leads them to somewhere that they don't want to go. And we know where that is. That the conclusion is that this was all done to one extent or another, deliberately, consciously. The government knew that they were fudging numbers, and they were doing it for an ulterior motive, and therefore the government is not your best friend.
That's what I was going to say. That people don't want to realize they were manipulated
Right.
to this extent. Anyway, they're happy to accept, scandals on a
Yeah.
piecemeal basis. But to
That Boris
this
Johnson was
extent-
having parties, for example, that's
yes,
fine.
that's the uproar in the UK. He really is or was about to lose his job.
Yeah.
The backbenchers, the kind of Tory powerhouses were like, should we fire him? The people really are pissed,
Right. But that they would do something so monstrous in that sense, because it becomes monstrous when it's presented as false, as a manipulation. You know, people, they're happy to accept that politicians will do things for personal interest, where they'll get their jollies, or they'll feather their own nests, etc., etc. But the idea that they would have a very malicious or malign intention towards the population as a whole, and do what they have done to people for for non-valid reasons, that the reasons that they give for doing what they did to the population are not valid, that presupposes it just says that it's somewhere people can't and won't go.